the invisible signal that makes you a magnet for toxic people. Here's a psychological fact you're not ready for. Toxic people know who you are before you know who they are. And it's not intuition, it's not energy, it's a very specific psychological pattern. Psychologists call this relational vulnerability detection, and once you understand it, you'll see why it always happens to you. In the next 20 minutes, I'm going to show you the exact mechanisms that make you visible to toxic people, how they test you without you realizing it, and most importantly, how to become completely invisible to them. This isn't about changing who you are, it's about understanding the signals you're unconsciously sending. Stay with me because what I'm about to reveal will fundamentally change how you see every relationship in your life. Let me start with something most people don't want to hear. If toxic people keep showing up in your life, it's not bad luck, it's not karma, it's not that you're cursed or that you have some kind of negative energy attracting them. It's actually much more specific and much more fixable than that. There's a psychological signature you're broadcasting, and toxic people are trained either through their own trauma or through years of manipulative behavior to detect it instantly. Think of it like this. Imagine you're walking through a crowd wearing an invisible sign that only certain people can see. That sign doesn't say I'm weak or I'm a victim. It says something far more subtle. It says I'm accessible, I'm negotiable, I won't make this difficult for you. And the moment a toxic person sees that sign, you become a target. Number 1, the invisible radar of toxic people. Toxic people have something highly developed, a low-effort social radar. Now, before you think this means they're genius manipulators who have studied psychology for years, let me clarify. Most toxic people aren't consciously aware of what they're doing. They don't sit down with a checklist and analyze your personality. They don't study your past. They don't read your mind. What they do is something far more instinctive and far more dangerous. They analyze your micro-actions. And they do it in real time in the first few seconds of meeting you. Let me give you concrete examples of what I'm talking about. You say no, but you smile to soften it. You say, I can't help you with that. But your tone is apologetic, almost guilty. Something bothers you. Someone makes a comment that crosses a line, but you minimize it. You say, oh, it's fine, don't worry about it, when internally you're screaming. They interrupt you mid-sentence and you go quiet. You were making a point, you were sharing something important, and they just talk right over you. And what do? You stop. You wait. You give them the floor. They make a hurtful comment, something that stings, and you laugh. You laugh it off because you don't want to seem sensitive. You don't want to create tension. You don't want to be that person who can't take a joke. Your brain in all of these moments thinks I'm being kind. I'm being mature. I'm being the bigger person. I'm keeping the peace. But here's the reality that's happening on the other side of that interaction. You're teaching them. You're teaching them exactly how far they can push you. You're teaching them that your boundaries are flexible. You're teaching them that your comfort is negotiable. You're teaching them that they can take up space in your life without consequences. But here's what makes this so insidious. Almost no one notices this is happening because the mechanism occurs in seconds. It's not a dramatic moment. It's not a big confrontation. It's a micro-transaction of power that happens so fast your conscious mind doesn't even register it. But their subconscious does. And your subconscious does too. You walk away from that interaction feeling slightly off, slightly drained, slightly diminished, but you, Lee, can't quite put your finger on why. That feeling? That's your internal alarm system telling you that a boundary was crossed and you didn't defend it. And here's the detail that almost no one explains to you. These micro moments accumulate. One instance of letting something slide might seem insignificant. But toxic people are keeping score even if they don't realize it. Each time you fail to correct them, each time you swallow your discomfort, each time you prioritize their comfort over your own boundaries, You're adding another data point to their unconscious assessment of you. And at some point, usually faster than you'd expect, they reach a conclusion. This person is safe to exploit. Not safe in the sense of trustworthy, safe in the sense of I can get what I want from this person without facing consequences. Number 2, how they test your boundaries without you noticing. This is where it gets really interesting from a psychological standpoint. Toxic people test boundaries like a hacker tests passwords. They don't come at you with brute force. They don't announce their intentions. They don't knock down your door. They enter little by little, testing for weaknesses, probing for entry points. It's a process that psychologists call incremental boundary violation, and it's one of the most effective manipulation tactics because it bypasses your natural defenses. Here's how it works in practice. It starts small, always small. A joke that's slightly uncomfortable. They say something that has an edge to it, something that could be offensive, but it's wrapped in humor. So if you react, they can say, "I was just joking, why are you so sensitive?" A passive-aggressive comment. "Oh, you're wearing that? Interesting choice." It sounds like an observation, but it feels like a judgment. An exigency that's minimally unfair. "Hey, since you're going that way anyway, can you pick this up for me?" It's a small ask, but you weren't actually planning to go that way. They're assuming your time and your route are negotiable. Now here's the critical part. In that moment, they're watching your reaction, not just what you say, but how you say it, your tone, your body language, the speed of your response. Do you immediately agree? Do you hesitate but comply anyway? Do you push back? And here's what most people don't realize. If there's no consequence, they advance. Not because they sat down and planned this, not because they're running some master manipulation scheme, but because at a subconscious level they learn that this behavior works with you. Think about it from a purely behavioral psychology standpoint. If a rat presses a lever and gets food, it will press that lever again. If a toxic person crosses your boundary and you don't enforce a consequence, they will cross it again. And they'll go a little further next time. The joke gets more cutting. The passive-aggressive comment becomes more direct. The small favor becomes a regular expectation. This is called behavioral conditioning, and it happens whether either party is consciously aware of it or not. And here's where most people get stuck. They stop at this realization and make a fundamental attribution error. They think, "I had bad luck. It always happens to me. I must attract people like this. There's something wrong with me that makes toxic people gravitate toward me." But that's not what's happening. You're not a magnet for toxic people. You're not emitting some kind of victim frequency that draws them in. The problem isn't what you attract. The problem is what you permit without realizing it. Every single person on Earth encounters toxic people. The difference is what happens next. Some people encounter a toxic person. That person tries their initial boundary test, hits resistance, and moves on to an easier target. Other people encounter that same toxic person. That person tries their initial boundary test, encounters no resistance, and settles in for the long haul. The difference isn't the toxic person. The difference is the response. And here comes the part that's going to be uncomfortable for a lot of you to hear. Toxic people don't primarily seek out the weak. They seek out the tolerant. Let me explain the distinction because it's crucial. Weakness implies inability. It implies you can't defend yourself, but that's often not true. You're probably capable, intelligent, strong in many areas of your life. The issue isn't that you can't set boundaries. The issue is that you won't. And there's usually a very understandable reason for that, which we'll get into. But from the toxic person's perspective, they're not looking for someone who can't fight back. They're looking for someone who won't fight back, someone who will absorb the discomfort, someone who will twist themselves into knots to maintain peace, someone who will sacrifice their own comfort to avoid confrontation. If you recognize yourself in this description, you're already marked, but Don't close this video. Don't click away feeling hopeless. Because here's where it gets even more important to understand. Number 3. The silence that gives you away. There's something that toxic people identify instantly, and it's more revealing than anything you could say. It's your silence when something crosses the line. Not silence from calmness, not the silence of someone who is centered and choosing not to engage, but silence from discomfort. That specific type of silence that screams, "I noticed what you just did. It bothered me, but I'm not going to say anything about it." That second when you hesitate, that moment when you feel the words forming in your throat, the objection, the correction, the boundary, and then you swallow it. That moment when you think, better not say anything, it's not that big of a deal, I don't want to make things awkward, maybe I'm overreacting, maybe they didn't mean it that way. In that moment, to you, you're avoiding a problem, you're being diplomatic, you're choosing your battles, you're being the mature one. But here's what's actually happening on the psychological level. You're providing information, critical information. The psychology here is brutal but clear. When you don't correct a behavior, you validate it. Not intentionally, not consciously. But from a behavioral standpoint, non-correction equals permission. It tells the other person, what you just did is acceptable in this relationship. You can do that again. And from that point forward, they're no longer testing boundaries. They're advancing. They know where the fence is, and they know you're not going to defend it. Let me give you a concrete example. Someone makes a comment about your appearance, your work, your choices, something that feels diminishing. You feel that little spike of discomfort in your chest. Your first instinct is to say something. But then the thoughts rush in. Maybe they didn't mean it that way. Maybe I'm being too sensitive. If I say something, they'll think I can't take feedback. It'll make things weird. So you smile. You might even laugh. You definitely don't correct them. What just happened? You taught them that they can diminish you without consequence. And next time they'll go a little further. Or here's another one. You make plans with someone, clear plans, and they cancel last minute. Not for an emergency. For something that clearly could have been planned around. You're frustrated. You cleared your schedule. You were looking forward to it. But when they text you with some casual excuse, you respond with "no problem, we'll reschedule," with a smiley face emoji. What did you just teach them? That your time isn't valuable. That their priorities can always supersede yours. That they can treat your commitments as optional. Before we go deeper, I need you to do something for me right now. If this information is already connecting dots for you, if you're starting to see patterns in your own life, hit that subscribe button and leave a like on this video. This content takes research, scripting, and production to create, and your engagement helps it reach other people who desperately need to hear this. People who are stuck in the same cycles you might be stuck in. People who think they're broken or cursed when really they just haven't learned these specific psychological mechanisms. And if this is hitting home for you, if you're having those "oh my God, that's exactly what I do" moments, drop a comment below sharing your experience. You don't have to go into detail if you don't want to, but just sharing "this is me" or describing one pattern you've recognized can be incredibly powerful. Not just for you, as a form of acknowledgement and commitment to change, but for other viewers who will read your comment and feel less alone. Your story might be the thing that gives someone else permission to finally set a boundary they've been afraid to set. So take a second, subscribe, like, comment. I'll wait. All right, let's continue. Because this next part explains why your life hasn't fundamentally changed yet, even if you've heard advice about boundaries before. Number 4. Your brain prefers to endure rather than set boundaries. This isn't a character flaw, this is neuroscience. Your brain has a primary directive, and it's not your happiness, it's not your dignity, it's not your self-respect. Your brain's primary directive is your survival. And for most of human history, survival meant being part of the group. Exile from the tribe meant death. Rejection meant you were on your own against predators, starvation, the elements. So your brain evolved an incredibly sensitive threat detection system specifically for social rejection. When you're in a situation where you need to set a boundary, where you need to correct someone, where you need to say, "That's not okay with me," your brain runs a rapid threat assessment. And here's what it calculates. If I set this boundary, this person might reject me. They might get angry, they might pull away, they might tell other people I'm difficult. I might lose this relationship, I might end up alone. Now consciously, you know that setting a healthy boundary with one person isn't going to leave you completely alone in the world. But your amygdala, the ancient part of your brain that handles threat detection, doesn't know that. It's running on software that's thousands of years old. And to that part of your brain, potential rejection equals potential death. So what does your brain do? It makes a calculation. It decides that discomfort right now, swallowing your objection, accepting the boundary violation, is safer than the potential consequences of speaking up. Your brain chooses silent discomfort over visible conflict every single time unless you consciously override it. And that's exhausting. That's why setting boundaries feels so hard. You're not just dealing with the other person, you're dealing with your own internal alarm system screaming at you that you're in danger. The problem, and this is what your amygdala doesn't understand, is that avoiding conflict today creates abuse tomorrow. Every time you choose short-term peace over long-term respect, you're training the other person that they can escalate. You're also training yourself that your feelings don't matter as much as avoiding discomfort. You're reinforcing a neural pathway that says, "My needs are negotiable. Other people's comfort is more important than my boundaries." Toxic people, whether they consciously understand this or not, have learned to exploit this exact mechanism. They've learned, often through their own dysfunctional backgrounds, that most people will choose to absorb discomfort rather than create conflict, and they've learned to identify the people who are most likely to make that choice. How? Through those micro-actions we talked about earlier, through your silence, through your nervous laughter, through the way you apologize when you haven't done anything wrong, through the way you over-explain your decisions as if you need to justify your right to have preferences. Let me tell you something that might sting a little bit, but I promise it's leading somewhere important. If this pattern has been showing up repeatedly in your life, if you keep finding yourself in relationships, whether romantic, friendship, family, or professional, where you feel drained, diminished, or disrespected, it's probably not a coincidence. And it's definitely not bad luck. It's a pattern, and patterns exist for a reason. Here's the truth that many people avoid, the truth that self-help culture often sugarcoats. Toxic people don't choose you because you're weak. They choose you because you're empathetic, because you're emotionally responsible, because you're reflective, because you're self-demanding. You're the person who, when there's conflict, immediately looks inward and asks, "What did I do wrong? How can I fix this? What do I need to change about myself?" Those are beautiful qualities. In healthy relationships, those qualities create depth, growth, and genuine connection. But without clear boundaries, those same qualities become an invitation for exploitation. Being empathetic means you can see things from the other person's perspective. Toxic people use that. They know you'll make excuses for them. They're going through a hard time. They didn't mean it that way. They had a difficult childhood. Being emotionally responsible means you take ownership of your impact on others. Toxic people use that too. They know you'll blame yourself before you blame them. Maybe I was too sensitive. Maybe I did provoke them. Maybe I'm expecting too much. Being reflective means you constantly examine your own behavior. Toxic people exploit that mercilessly. They know you'll tie yourself in knots wondering if you're the problem, while they never question their own behavior for a second. So let me be crystal clear about something. Being a good person without boundaries isn't virtue. It's a vulnerability. It's a signal. And toxic people are excellent at detecting signals. They can spot someone who will absorb blame from across a crowded room. They can identify someone who will prioritize keeping the peace over protecting themselves within minutes of meeting them. And once they've identified you, the testing begins. Now, if you want to break this cycle, if you genuinely want to stop attracting, or more accurately, stop retaining toxic people in your life, you need to start with something that's going to feel simple in theory, but incredibly uncomfortable in practice. Are you ready? Here it is. Stop explaining your boundaries. Just stop. No justifications, no lengthy explanations, no preemptive apologies, no softening language. Most people, when they try to set a boundary, do it like this. Hey, I'm so sorry. I know this is probably not a big deal and I might be overreacting, but I just wanted to mention that when you said that thing earlier, it kind of made me feel a little uncomfortable, but like, maybe you didn't mean it that way, so I don't know. Just thought I'd mention it, sorry. What did that boundary sound like to a toxic person? It sounded like, I'm not actually sure about this boundary. I'm apologizing for having it. I'm giving you multiple opportunities to dismiss it. Please convince me that I'm wrong to feel this way. Here's what a clear boundary actually sounds like. I don't like that. That's it. 3 words. I'm not going to accept that. 6 words. That doesn't work for me. 5 words. Notice what's missing? Justification, apology, invitation to debate. You're not asking permission to have a boundary. You're not seeking their approval of your boundary. You're informing them that the boundary exists. And here's the part that's going to feel almost impossible at first. After you state the boundary, silence. No nervous laughter, no additional explanation. No walking it back, just silence. Let it sit there. Let them sit with it. Let the discomfort exist in the space between you without rushing to fix it, smooth it over, or take it back. This is where the real change happens. Not in reading about boundaries, not in understanding the psychology, but in that moment of discomfort where every fiber of your being wants to fill the silence, wants to apologize, wants to make them feel better about the fact that you just set a limit. That moment where your amygdala is screaming, danger, you're going to be rejected, fix this. And you don't. You sit with the discomfort, you let your boundary stand. Here's what will happen, and this is important to understand beforehand so you don't panic. There will be pushback. Toxic people do not respond well to boundaries, especially if you've never set them before. They'll act confused. Wow, where is this coming from? You never had a problem with this before. They'll act hurt. I can't believe you would say that to me. I thought we were close. They'll act angry. You're being ridiculous. You're too sensitive. You're overreacting. They might give you the silent treatment. They might try to turn other people against you. They might escalate their bad behavior to test whether your boundary is real or performative. This is the moment where most people cave, because the pushback activates every fear they had about setting the boundary in the first place. See, I knew this would happen. I knew they'd get upset. I knew I'd lose the relationship. I should have just kept quiet. But here's what you need to understand. The pushback isn't proof that you shouldn't have set the boundary. The pushback is proof that you needed to set it. Healthy people don't punish you for having boundaries. Healthy people might be surprised if you've never set them before. They might need clarification about where the line is. But once you clearly communicate a boundary, healthy people respect it. They might not love it. They might wish things were different, but they respect it. Toxic people, on the other hand, view your boundaries as obstacles to getting what they want, and they will absolutely push back against those obstacles. So the pushback isn't a sign you made a mistake. It's a litmus test. It's diagnostic information. It's showing you exactly who this person is and how they view your right to have limits. And this is going to sound harsh, but it's the truth. If setting a boundary cost you a relationship, that relationship was costing you something far more valuable. Your peace, your self-respect, your emotional energy, your sense of safety. That wasn't a mutually beneficial relationship. That was a transaction where you were paying an increasingly high price for scraps of conditional approval. Let me tell you what happens when you actually maintain boundaries consistently, not once, not in one dramatic confrontation, but consistently over time with everyone in your life. Two things happen, and both of them are victories, even though one of them won't feel like it at first. First, healthy people adjust. They might be surprised by your new boundaries, especially if they knew you before when you had none. They might even be a little annoyed if your lack of boundaries was benefiting them in some way. But ultimately, if they value the relationship and they're capable of respect, they adjust. They learn where your limits are. They stop doing the things you've identified as not okay. The relationship continues, but on healthier terms. And here's what's beautiful about this. Once healthy people know where your boundaries are, they often relax. Because they're not worried about accidentally hurting you and you not telling them. They're not walking on eggshells. They know the rules of engagement, and they can trust that if they cross a line, you'll tell them. Second, toxic people leave. And I want to be really clear about this. They don't usually leave gracefully. They don't say, you know what, you're right. I've been treating you poorly. I'm going to work on myself. Good luck to you. No. They leave with accusations. They leave trying to make you the villain. They leave trying to turn your mutual friends against you. They leave trying to make you feel guilty for having the audacity to stop accepting unacceptable behavior. And in that moment, when they're leaving messily and loudly and making you out to be the bad guy, it's going to be incredibly tempting to chase them, to apologize, to take back your boundaries, to prove that you're not the terrible person they're making you out to be. Don't do it. Let them leave. Because here's what's actually happening. They're showing you who they are. They're showing you that they valued what they could get from you more than they valued you as a person. They're showing you that their access to you was always conditional on your compliance. And as painful as it is to see, clearly clarity is a gift. It might not feel like a gift in the moment, it might feel like loss, but 6 months from now, a year from now, you will look back and recognize it as the moment everything changed. Because here's the shift that happens when you start setting and maintaining boundaries. You stop being visible to toxic people, not because you've changed your fundamental nature, not because you've become hard or cold or closed off, but because the signal you're broadcasting changes. Remember at the beginning when I talked about that invisible sign toxic people can see? When you consistently set boundaries, that sign changes. It no longer says, I'm accessible, I'm negotiable, I won't make this difficult for you. It starts saying, I know my worth, I know my limits, I will make this very difficult for you if you try to exploit me. And toxic people? They read that sign and they move on. Not because you've rejected them, not because you've been mean to them, but because they're looking for ease. They're looking for someone who will absorb the cost of their dysfunction. Someone who will twist themselves into shapes to accommodate their bad behavior. And you're no longer that person. Let me tell you something about the version of you that exists on the other side of this shift. That version of you has fewer relationships, but deeper ones. That version of you has less drama, but more peace. That version of you doesn't need to brace themselves every time their phone buzzes, wondering what crisis or demand is coming. That version of you doesn't end every social interaction feeling drained and confused about what just happened. That version of you doesn't lie awake at night replaying conversations and wishing they'd said something different. That version of you responds to life from a place of groundedness rather than reaction. When someone tests a boundary, and people will always test boundaries, it's not an emergency, it's not a crisis, it's just information, and you respond calmly, clearly, without anger or anxiety. Just, that doesn't work for me, or I'm not available for that, or simply no. And then you move on with your day. You don't ruminate, you don't second guess, you don't lose sleep. Because you know that your boundaries aren't up for debate. They're not mean. They're not selfish. They're necessary. They're the terms under which you're available for relationship, and people can accept those terms or not. But the terms don't change based on someone else's reaction to them. Now, I know some of you are thinking, this sounds great in theory, but I've tried to set boundaries before and it didn't work. I tried to stand up for myself and it made things worse. I tried to say no and the other person made me feel so guilty that I ended up apologizing. And I want to address that because it's a really common experience. Here's what usually happens. People try to set boundaries before they've built the internal foundation to maintain them. They're still looking for the other person's approval of the boundary. They're still hoping the other person will say, "You're absolutely right. I'm so sorry, I'll change immediately." And when that doesn't happen, when the other person pushes back or acts hurt or gets angry, they crumble. Because their boundary was built on hope rather than conviction. So before you can effectively set external boundaries, you need to build internal ones. You need to get clear, not intellectually clear, but emotionally clear on what you will and will not accept in your life. And that clarity can't be based on what you think you should want or what other people think is reasonable. It has to be based on what actually feels sustainable for you. What actually allows you to show up in relationships as your full self rather than a diminished, resentful version of yourself. Here's an exercise that can help with this. Think about a relationship in your life where you feel consistently drained or disrespected. Now ask yourself, if I knew with absolute certainty that this person would never change, that this is who they are and this is how they'll always treat me, would I want them in my life? Not could I tolerate them, not could I manage it? But genuinely, would I want this relationship to continue as it currently is? If the answer is no, then you're staying in that relationship based on hope. Hope that they'll change. Hope that if you just find the right words or the right approach, they'll finally see you and value you the way you deserve. And hope is beautiful. But hope without boundaries is just prolonged suffering. Because you're essentially saying, I will accept treatment that doesn't work for me indefinitely on the chance that it might someday improve. That's not hope. That's self-abandonment. So what do? You make a different choice. Not necessarily to immediately exit the relationship, although that's absolutely an option if the relationship is actively harmful. But to stop participating in your own diminishment, to stop making yourself smaller so they can stay comfortable, to stop accepting unacceptable behavior because you're afraid of the alternative. You start with one boundary, just one. Pick the thing that bothers you most, the behavior that makes you feel most disrespected or most drained, and you set a clear boundary around it. Not a hint, not a suggestion, a boundary. I don't engage with raised voices. When you're ready to talk calmly, I'm available. I need 24 hours notice for plans. I don't discuss my personal life with you. Whatever it is, make it clear and specific, and then, and this is the part where most people fail, you enforce it. Every single time. Not most times, not when it's convenient. Every time. Because boundaries without enforcement aren't boundaries, they're suggestions. And toxic people don't respond to suggestions. They respond to consistency. They respond to realizing that testing your boundary won't work. That pushing against it won't make it move. That you mean what you say. Will this be uncomfortable? Absolutely. Will some people react badly without question? Will you doubt yourself constantly, at least at first? But here's what else will happen. You'll start to feel different. You'll start to feel like yourself again. That feeling of constantly walking on eggshells, constantly monitoring the other person's mood, constantly trying to preempt their reactions, that feeling will start to fade. And in its place, you'll find something you might not have felt in a long time. Peace. Not the fragile peace of maybe if I'm very careful and very accommodating, there won't be a conflict today. but real peace. The peace of knowing that you're not betraying yourself to maintain a relationship. The peace of knowing that the relationships you have are based on mutual respect rather than your compliance. The peace of knowing that you can handle conflict because you're no longer operating from a place of fear. And here's the beautiful irony. When you stop being desperate for approval, when you stop contorting yourself to maintain relationships, when you start operating from a place of self-respect, you become more attractive to healthy people, not in a manipulative, strategic way, but genuinely. Because healthy people are drawn to other healthy people. People with boundaries are drawn to people with boundaries. People who respect themselves are drawn to people who respect themselves. So as we come to the end of this video, I want to leave you with a final thought, the thing I most want you to remember. Toxic people don't detect you because you're naive. They don't detect you because you're broken. They don't detect you because there's something fundamentally wrong with you. They detect you because you haven't yet learned that your peace is worth more than their approval, that your dignity is worth more than their comfort, that your self-respect is worth more than avoiding conflict. When you truly internalize that, when it moves from something you intellectually understand to something you emotionally know, everything changes. You stop asking, how do I make them understand? How do I make them see my value? How do I make them treat me better? And you start asking, does this relationship add to my life or take from it? Does this person respect my boundaries or consistently violate them? Is this relationship sustainable for me as my authentic self? Those are very different questions, and they lead to very different outcomes. The first set of questions keeps you stuck, keeps you focused on changing someone else's behavior, which you cannot control. The second set of questions empowers you, focuses you on what you can control, which is who you allow into your life and under what terms. So if you take one thing from this video, take this. You are not a magnet for toxic people. You're a person who has been taught, whether by your family of origin, by past experiences, by cultural conditioning, that your needs matter less than avoiding discomfort. And that's a lie. Your needs matter. Your boundaries matter. Your peace matters. And the moment you start living like that's true, the moment you start making decisions based on your own well-being rather than other people's reactions, toxic people will stop finding you. Not because you've become someone different, but because you finally become aligned with who you actually are. If this video helped you see something clearly that you've been struggling to understand, if it gave you language for experiences you couldn't quite articulate, if it gave you permission to finally set a boundary you've been afraid to set, then please subscribe to this channel right now. Because we go deep on topics like this. We don't do surface-level advice. We don't do toxic positivity. We do real psychology, real mechanisms, real strategies for actually changing your life. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next video where we're going to go even deeper into specific techniques for setting boundaries in different contexts. With family, with romantic partners, at work, with friends. And leave a comment right now telling me one boundary you're committing to setting this week. Just one. Write it down. Make it real. Make it a commitment not just to me, but to yourself. Your future self, the one living in peace instead of chaos, is depending on you to start today.